Justin, what did you make of the messages?
Terrible, obscene, appalling. That we have children, that we have anybody, it doesn't matter how old you are, it's not okay to send messages like this to anybody under any circumstances. This is threatening and it's damaging.
I mean, these are sexual threats sent on a school laptop during school hours. So it's right under the nose of teachers.
One of the great challenges that we have is throughout history, we've never had a whole lot of kids the same age spending this level of concentrated time together. There's always been a village, there's been other adults, there's been older kids, younger kids. In society today, we get all these kids whose brains are not fully formed and who are very much oriented towards status and reward. They discount risk and they don't have the neural architecture to recognise the damage that what they're doing can cause.
And what is the consequence?
There are consequences in a bunch of different directions. First of all, let's talk about the victim of the threat. A young girl feels unsafe, but this casts a long shadow into the rest of her life. This is why so many girls and women say that they feel unsafe walking down the street, walking to their car in a car park, getting into a lift with a man. It's because they feel threatened. They feel like they're being objectified. They feel like somebody, anybody, could be scary. The consequences also exist in the broader school community and in our community at large. Because when enough of these things happen, and make no mistake, Ali, this is happening every single day in, I would say, most schools around the country. It's really unusual that this would not be happening in every single school. So the consequence is that girls generally feel unsafe. But there's another consequence as well, and that is for the boys. What do I mean by that? When we have I'm going to say a small percentage of boys who are responsible for the majority of this turgid behaviour. What happens then is that everybody starts pointing fingers and saying boys are a problem, boys are bad. And then people start hating on boys, which means that the boys start to feel threatened and they start to hate the people who are hating them. The sexes rise and fall together. When we make enemies of 50% of the population, we end up in a terrible gender war. And that's what this behaviour creates. That's the real consequence.
Because we don't want to demonise young boys in all of this. We just want them to understand what is right, what is wrong, and for that behaviour to change.
One of the most complex things about this is that parents will say, but my 13-year-old or my 17-year-old, he's so sweet, he's so kind, he's a real gentleman, he's a good kid. And overwhelmingly, parents who say that about their boys are right. I've met so many, I'm going to say beautiful boys, just great kids. But unfortunately, some of those beautiful kids are also getting onto Discord or getting onto Instagram or getting onto Snapchat, and their parents have no idea what they're saying to their mates in those dank meme conversations.
And what are they seeing when they get online? What are they seeing and what are they hearing that's led to this behaviour?
If you've looked at anything that the Andrew Tates of the world say, do you know what? I hate saying this. I wish I couldn't say this. But every now and again, this guy says things that really resonate with boys about taking some power and about doing the reps and making yourself strong and making yourself something in the world. Like, that's really appealing to a boy who's feeling disempowered. But he mixes it in with so much misogyny. What do I mean by misogyny? It's literally the hatred of women, talking about them as objects, about slaves, as only being good for a couple of things, cleaning and, I was going to say intimacy, but the way he talks about it, there's nothing intimate about it. That's what they're seeing. But they're also seeing anti-Semitism and they're seeing violence. The number of boys who have seen the most extreme violence, I mean, beheadings and assaults, they get status from assaulting people and posting it online. This is the kind of stuff that too many of our boys and our girls are experiencing in the online world. When you watch the TV show on Netflix, Adolescence, you get a kind of a picture of what's actually going on. It leads to a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding, a lack of compassion, and it creates so much pain for so many families.
You look at Adolescence, where a young boy is radicalised by online misogyny, and you realise this is the world our kids live in.
Let me go further. In that show, we're seeing a 13-year-old boy being mocked and bullied because he is an incel. That is, he's involuntarily celibate. Just take a step back for a second and think about that. He's 13. He's supposed to be celibate, and there shouldn't be anything voluntary or involuntary about it. He's 13. But because he is mocked for it, and because he is in this online world and he's in his bedroom until 2 a.m. with no parental supervision on screens and having these chats, he does become, I mean, the word is radicalised. That's what we use it. That's the way we describe it. But really, this is just a kid who's completely enmeshed and doesn't understand where the boundaries are. And if it's happening online, well, that's as real as anything that's happening offline. Parents have, I don't like to throw shade at parents. I want to be an advocate and an ally for parents because I know that parents are exhausted and stressed and a little bit confused and are not sure what to do. When you hear a conversation like the one we're having, or you watch a show like Adolescence, or you hear a story like this, you kind of go, what do I do? Well, here's what you do. You get the kids off their screens, especially in the bedroom or in the bathroom. No screens in those places, just public places. And you have limits. As the parent, you have to be the prefrontal cortex of your family because the kids, it's not quite working up there yet. They need limits, they need to be off their screens in the appropriate places, and you've got to have conversations early and often. And when I say often, I mean often. This is a great starting point. You and I talking about this broader story. Hey kids, I saw this thing on the telly. Is it happening at school? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Chocolate milkshake, box of cookies, have a chat.
Her mum complained to the school. How do you think it was handled?
I'm reluctant to talk about an individual case. I don't know all the details, although I have seen a lot of the emails. Here's what I'll say at a general level. Most schools are not dealing with these issues well at all. When a girl is threatened by a boy and she's the one that's taking time off school, when a girl is threatened by a boy and she's the one who's told, you'll need to move classes. Her education is the one that's being interrupted where she is the victim. That's not okay.
And you now have a young girl who doesn't ever want to be in the school ground again.
Keep me away from this place and probably keep me away from all schools because it's going to happen no matter where I go. Absolutely. Generally, what I'm seeing is this, with a few notable and exceptional people who are doing it right, the general situation is that schools will act effectively when there are financial or reputational repercussions. But if it's not about money and it's not about reputation, too often it's being band-aided over. It's being swept under the rug. Or what's worse, at the moment there's a huge trend in Australian schools for what's called restorative practice. So we have a restorative circle, meaning the victim and the perpetrator sit in a circle with other wise adults around, and the victim explains how she felt. In this case, it's a girl who's been victimized by a boy. She explains how she felt, and he listens, and then he expresses empathy and apologizes for what he's done. How is it appropriate that a girl in a sexual threat or a sexual assault situation should have to sit opposite? And the boys know that they can say what they have to say and get out. They know that that's it. Restorative practice does have its usefulness, but not in situations like this. Too many schools are using it with a lack of training, a lack of understanding, and they're simply doing it inappropriately.
So how should a school handle something like this?
Well, first and foremost, the children need to be separated. And if there's evidence, then the perpetrator should be asked to take some time away from the school while an appropriate response is formulated.
So either a suspension, and when they come back, they should be the ones that move class?
Every context is going to be different, Ali.
Yeah.
And as the school gathers information and assesses it with the individuals in mind, they'll be able to then work out what is going to be best for people moving forward. I love what one school principal said to me when I posted about this on social media. He responded by saying that he had something similar happen in his school, because it happens everywhere. The parents defended their son. And that's got to stop. Parents have got to be objective enough to say, he is a good kid, but he crossed the line. There's got to be ownership. There's got to be accountability. There's got to be responsibility.
I think that's what's hard, right? Like, you never want to think that this was my child that was the bully, my child, my son,
Totally.
who made sexual threats against another student.
I have all the empathy in the world for parents, and I understand why they don't want to believe that it's their son, but when the evidence is in front of you, Own it. Just acknowledge, yep, he did it.
Because you're not helping them if you
You're
don't.
not helping him if you sweep it under the rug and say, oh, no, not my son, or he was provoked. Just own it. Provoked or not, he still did that thing. So own it and help him to own it. The principal in this particular story was confronted by parents who said, but he's a good kid and he really needs to be back at school now. And the principal said, he does, but not at this school. When kids face real consequences, that's when they start to learn the lessons. If we don't let them face the consequences, then they never grow up. They always think they'll be rescued. They always think that there'll be somebody who's going to make things all better for them.
No lessons have been learnt.
Not if that kid is still in the same class and he gets a slap on the wrist and he has to write an apology letter. There's no lesson learned.
No. Have we reached a point that students are sending messages like this to each other during school hours?
One word, pornography. We have really good research that indicates that on average kids are seeing pornography somewhere around about 11 for the first time.
11?
But we're talking about on average. So anyone who's done basic maths remembers that the average is right in the middle.
Yeah.
That means 50% of kids are older than 11, but 50% are younger. Now, when you talk to some of Australia's best educators in this area, people like Daniel Prince-Pay or Melinda Tankard-Rees, they will tell you of stories with 5, 6 and 7-year-olds who are going to a slumber party or who are at a school camp or who are on a bus and who are being shown explicit content. And often, young kids, they're a bit sickened, they're really confused, but biologically we're designed to be curious and oriented towards this as well. We know that grade 5, grade 6, grade 7 kids, they're seeing it. We also know that young men, boys aged, let's say 14 to 17, 14 to 19, are the highest consumers of explicit content globally. What's worse, when we have a look at data from here in Australia, if we have a look at people aged 14 to 29, males, 84% are viewing pornography on at least a weekly, if not a daily basis. Here's what it does. It teaches the wrong messages about consent. It changes the script in a young person's head. So if I've never held hands with someone, if I've never kissed somebody, but I'm watching explicit imagery played out in a video on my phone or laptop or iPad, that's creating a script for what's supposed to happen, what my expectations should be. Which means that at some point in the future, I am going to be in a physically intimate situation with somebody and I'm going to try to do what I've seen because that's the script I have. Now that's devastating. That explains why so many young women are being taken to hospital with injuries that they should not have as a result of usually young men trying to do what they've seen in the explicit content that's online. But more than that, what pornography does is it enhances what's known as the rape myth. That is, that if something happens to a girl, she was asking for it, and that girls are always ready for it. It reduces the likelihood of young men taking precautions. It increases STIs because people don't talk about it. Essentially, everything that you can think of that's bad when it comes to anything physically intimate is pushed by pornography. And what we really want our kids to understand is that mutual love and respect and kindness and consideration is what makes for great intimacy. They just don't get it because they're seeing it online and then they're bringing it into their conversations. They're seeking status, they're seeking conquest, they're trying to prove that they've done stuff, even if they haven't, because they've seen it, they can describe it.
Is it only boys?
No, it's not only boys. There are two things here. From a pornography point of view, boys are the main consumers, but there are many girls who struggle with it and their scripts are being rewritten. From a sexual threat point of view, it's not just boys. Now, it is primarily boys. And it's important to highlight here, because what I'm going to say next is a little bit provocative. So it's important to highlight that boys threatening girls casts a long shadow into the life of that girl. It creates great concern for her in many, many ways for a long time, and the harms are disproportionate.
So there's a long-term impact.
Long-term impact. When a girl threatens a boy, or when a girl touches without consent a boy, and then says, you can't go at me because I'll just say it's violence against women. And I've received so many emails from parents who are saying, my son is the one that's being attacked. Yes, it does have an impact on the boy, and I don't want to minimise it, but the harm is different proportionately. Boys tend to move through this and process it more effectively and still seem to be able to have productive relationships with members of the opposite sex eventually. That's not to say it's not harmful. It is. It's terrible. The harm done to girls, though, the fear, the terror, the mistrust, the divide that it creates, the cleaving of the genders is simply greater when it's a boy threatening a girl.
So what do we do about it?
This is the question everyone's asking. And in some ways it's really, really complicated. But in other ways, it's actually quite simple. Here are a couple of things that we can do right now as a parent who's concerned. Number one, keep devices out of bedrooms. Number two, have limits around devices. What time does it need to go off at night? We know that kids are usually going to be doing more concerning things late at night when they're not being supervised versus while they're in the living room or at the dining table and parents are walking past the screen. Number three, be what I would describe as a pot plant parent. Pot plant, it's over in the corner. It's not really doing much, but it really improves the environment. When kids know that they've got parents who care about them and who are simply available, who are simply around, they make better choices. They make better decisions. Maybe the hardest thing of all, though, is that we need to have conversations with our kids. We need to talk about stories like this. We've got to talk about consent. I'm an ambassador for the Consent Can't Wait campaign run by the federal government because these conversations aren't happening enough. Talk about what it means to touch somebody with or without their consent, how your child feels, how somebody else would feel if they did it. Find out what the other kids are saying. Having these conversations, listening as much as you're talking, and passing it. This stuff doesn't exist in a moral vacuum. If it's just about consent, it's not quite enough. Our job as parents is to socialise our kids, to teach them values. So we've got to have the conversations. Now, if we can do those things, we're already miles ahead of where we are right now.
I heard a doctor say the other day she'd rather give her child a cigarette than social media.
How confronting is it to hear that? And yet, we just hand our kids these phones and walk away. Let's talk about culpability for a second. Generally, when an incident like this occurs, and I'm not speaking just about this one, I'm speaking about in general terms, tech companies are culpable. They're creating environments with no supervision, no monitoring, no guidelines, no guardrails, no frameworks, nothing. Sure, you can report abuse, but not many people really do, and the response is appalling. It's just not good. Tech companies are culpable. Schools, I hate to lay some blame at the feet of the schools, but they are culpable here. They're putting these devices into the hands of children. Many parents come to me and say, I don't want my kid to have a laptop yet, but the school's demanding it. And
Kids are smarter, right? You can put whatever blocks and security in place, they'll find a way around it.
They will if they want to. But then the schools are also not doing the follow-up. They're not doing the remedial work that's necessary to keep kids safe. This is why we're having a conversation like this today. Number three, I'm so sorry, but the parents who let their kids use unlimited screen time in their bedrooms on whatever website or app they want, this is on you. Parents, you've got to own this. And we need to do better. I know parents are stressed and overworked and don't know what to do and confused, but we have got to get this right. And the blame also lies at the feet of the children. They're the ones who are actually doing this stuff. They're the ones that are geeing each other up. They're the ones that are egging each other on. They're the ones that are conferring status on the kid who said that thing and, wow, you burned that person or you drilled that. Or they're the ones, the alphas of the grade 8 classroom or the grade 12 classroom. They are also contributing to this. This is a society-wide problem. We all need to step up.